Thank you, Vanport Mosaic. This is CHISAO HATA, and we definitely like to thank Laura Forti, who's the curator of the festival, the Virtual Vanport Festival 2020, and Andrew De Vigal, who is her indispensable partner. And the work of Vanport Mosaic has intersected with my life for the last 5 years. And I greatly appreciate the journey of memories and stories of America that are recognized and finally told. I'd like to thank Darrell Grant and Henk Pender today for taking their time to connect and have this art talk, but also initiating a new program that I call Moving Boundaries, creating engagements on racial identity and cultural justice in America through artful expressions. So this 2020 virtual Vanport has been exploring questions of identity, justice, and survival by asking, who gets to be an American? And what does it mean to be an American today?
Wow. Thanks to Sal for inviting me and Laura. It's nice to hear that music again. That was a piece called um, "The New Black," which I composed last year on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of my debut CD, which was called Black Art. And it's really interesting to explore these questions of identity, of cultural identity, of personal identity, of citizenship and belonging, because I feel like for me as an artist, that's at the heart of a lot of what my work is. I think that for me, finding personal identity and understanding, what it means to be Black in America, what it means to be African American, is something that has been sort of a process of growth, exploration over my entire life. Um, I grew up in a suburb of Denver, Colorado called Lakewood, Colorado, and I like to tell I don't like to tell people, but the truth is that my family was one of the only, like, 3 or 4 Black families in as far as I could see. My brother and sister and I were, um, 3 of the 4 African American children that I went to school with from the time of kindergarten all the way through, maybe 7th grade, and there were only a handful more after that. So for me, trying to figure out what it meant to be Black in America and sort of navigate that landscape without a lot of role models was something that was a part of my journey. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation with talking to Chisao and Hank about how identity works for them. So
So you're seeing some paintings by Hank Pender, and I don't see Hank. Where are you, Hank? Are you there? Um, because we're supposed to be hearing him talk now. So can you just show his paintings? Is he's, or we could go back to me if Hank's not there. Is there a problem with Hank? So I just wanted to say that at about 5:20, maybe 5:25, we can stop and we're going to take some questions. So as you're listening to this art talk today and you have some questions, just write them down and we will get to them. So I have a similar beginning as Darrell in that I grew up in a place called Des Moines, Iowa, which has become known for its politics and political landscape more so than when I grew up there. And I ended up there because my parents were interned during World War II in one of the 10 concentration camps. My mother was sent to post in Arizona as a nurse, and my dad soon followed, and then they were married there in post in Arizona. And when you left camp, you had to have a sponsor, or you had to have someone to help you get out of camp. And my mother had a doctor that she connected with in Des Moines, Iowa, and that's how she ended up there. So this cultural identity, or my search for my own racial identity, has really fueled a lot of most of my work, actually. And I realized that there was a period of time that and I don't know if Darrell, if you felt this, but I was pretty mad. I was mad that I was denied my history. I was not happy that I didn't grow up without a family, without my Japanese American family, without a community. And so I didn't want to say that I was from Iowa at all. In fact, I finally, after years of searching and really going into my history, and the civil rights movement was there, and the Asian American movement came, and through all my organizing, I realized I didn't need to hate being from Iowa, because what I got from that, while I didn't have the rooting of my cultural identity, I did have this amazing exposure to artists. And so I was taught by master artists in music and in dance and in to the Des Moines Art Center and visual art and in theater. I had these amazing artist teachers in high school that and all of these people like believed in me. Like they saw something, and even like years later they can I had my drama teacher said, well, I always knew. I'm like, what are you talking about? He said, I knew. And as a teacher you kind of know, right? You know who the students are that you feel they have a calling or a fire under them.
That's funny, I had a speech teacher in high school, and he used to, I was pretty clear from the time I was in high school that I wanted to be a musician. I think, I saw my dad was an engineer, and I saw how hard he works, and I was like, pretty sure I don't want a day job. Pretty sure I like this idea of being a touring and traveling and famous musician. So I would tell him in English class, he's like, what are you going to do? It's like, I'm going to be a jazz musician. He's like, no, you're going to be a leader. I was like, no, I'm not leading anything. I'm going to be a jazz musician. And lo and behold, he's, I feel like I've told this story so many times over my life, because he saw something in me that I didn't really even see in myself. And I don't think you can. I mean, I have a 15-year-old, and I'm pretty sure that he has no idea what we all see in him.
Right.
Because he's too young.
I had to do this exercise where I was reflecting. I had to list 50 people who had influenced my life in some way.
Wow.
I started out at the beginning of my first memory, right? And there's a lot of names that came up that I didn't think would be the people that influenced me.
Mm-hmm.
One of them was my 7th grade English teacher.
Mm.
And
Cool.
she said, "Well, why don't you think about doing something for the seventh grade talent show?"
Mhm.
Never really thought about that until she said, "Yeah, you should really do something." I ended up doing a solo to Eleanor Rigby, and I was, like a cleaning woman, and I found this like amazingly beautiful necklace, and it was like finding this beauty in this
Mhm.
daily, you know,
Mhm.
call essential work kind of
Mm.
scenario, right? But
Wow.
kind of got me, I think, interested and fueled a bit in theater. And
Mm.
I had a drama teacher from second grade, and I put her name down, Portia. I mean, who could
Mm.
not be dramatic with the name Portia, Portia Boynton, and she just taught the craft from
Yeah.
second grade all the way, all the way up. And so, did we get Hank yet?
It looks like on the chat, no, not yet. Maybe they're
Okay.
still
Well,
working
I
on it.
wanted to just say that this period of time that we're going through, not only the pandemic, which is challenging and frightening, and my friends, especially Native Americans, are like, well, this was going to come if you destroy the earth. What are you thinking? Well, people have it coming back on them because of their actions. And
Hmm.
we are in relationship fully with nature, and we need to be. So, I would like to believe or hope that, we see the fumes going down, the sky getting clear, the environment clearing up, that people would take a lesson and really look at, well, do I need to do this? Do I,
Hmm.
and then the separation that's happening among that has been happening for a while, but the hatred that's being fueled, and I think maybe even unresolved since slavery and since the Civil War. So we see things that are just not just heartbreaking, but just frustrating, angry.
Hmm.
I mean,
Well, I think, it looks like Hank is back. He's back.
okay, great.
Hey.
Yes, I hope.
Hey, there you
Yay, there
are.
you
Hey,
are. There's
great.
the little Hank.
This technology is a little bit over my head. So,
It's okay.
and the cell phone is so sensitive, and then I get like a phone call right in the middle of it, and I touch something, and the whole thing goes haywire. And
But
then
Hank, you
my helper went away to pick up her boyfriend, and so I'm here alone. And I made
so
friends to touch the thing, but yeah, I'm back. I won't touch it. So,
okay, but
oh,
you've been
oh,
sheltered in, right? You've been sheltered in.
pardon?
You've been sheltered in. You've been staying home.
I've been home. Yeah, I've been home for like the last probably more than 2 months,
Hmm.
and yeah, since I'm a little bit older and I am really attached to life, I thought, well, I'm not going to take any kind of risks whatsoever, and I have a very nice person who lives in my little basement apartment, and so she gets the groceries. I have a studio and I have a fairly comfortable little house. So there's really no reason for me to go out. And it took me a while to sort of get into the swing of being back to work. But in the last month or so, I just been in the studio, I just been painting.
Hmm.
And yeah, I'll
I
talk
was
a
the
little bit
kind
about,
of
pardon?
I was equally uninspired until about a week ago.
Yeah, it took a while. Yeah. Also, I wouldn't be able to get out of bed until like, noon or so. And everything seemed pointless. I didn't write in my journal anymore. I didn't do anything. I was sort of paralyzed. But slowly, I sort of pulled myself out of it. And then I had, I had a book I bought a number of years, about 10 years ago. I have a book. It's a detailed study on the plague in the 14th century, which I had
Lovely.
already had in mind once from this would be well written and extremely detailed. And I always thought, well, 10 years ago, I thought that has some really incredibly powerful potential paintings in it. But then I never saw any kind of reason to do anything with it. But while this whole thing is happening with this virus, I started looking again at this book, and I thought, rather than making paintings about the current experience, is to really maybe do some studies and set it back in time as if it were a story or a long time ago, and become more fantastical or more like unimaginable in a way. And at the same time, what happened there during that period was just, I think we're lucky that we're not in a period of the plague, because there was a particular kind of plague, and when people speak to each other, the other person would instantly get the plague, and within 14 hours they would die a horrible death. So,
So you're
in
saying
that
we're kind of
period of,
lucky?
pardon?
You're saying we're
Yeah,
kind of
because we're
lucky now
still
in a way?
talking here. If we would have been in Italy sometime in 1347 or 48, we'd be dead already. We'd be sort of lying there in a pit.
Yeah.
So it's like nearly half the population of the world, not only in Europe but also in China, actually all the way through to like Greenland.
Wow.
Sometimes like 60% of all the people would be dead in a really short time, and whatever, I mean, that disease was indescribably gruesome. So in that sense, it could be a lot worse. But I I thought, well, I think it would be really extremely interesting to make a painting about the first city where the plague sort came out of like bacilli, which lived in the desert of Central Asia. And these caravans with the camels and stuff would travel through there, and the fleets would travel on the camels, and they'd go to these, end up in these merchant cities of the Italians had built in the Crimea, and the whole town would, the people would die, and they would, of the plague, and they would, then they had ships there, and they'd get the hell out of here, and so they got in these plague ships, and they sailed across the, the the Black Sea and the Dardanelles and the Mediterranean, and they go by these coasts and stuff, these ships with these sick people on them. And gradually, with the transportation system, they spread the plague all throughout, ultimately throughout the world. And I thought, maybe I'll do a painting of the city of Kaffa, which is on fire. It was a huge battle, and a lot of population had died already. And these plague ships, these galleys, would then sail away, and then from there spread this disease from elsewhere. Just very much like the coronavirus is really following the big trade routes across the world, and nowadays with airplanes and cars and the kind of methods we have to move around, but it actually moves around really quite similarly, and it also spreads by little droplets and stuff we breathe in and catch from each other, and it's a disease which is still developing, and already like 100,000 people died in the United States, gruesome death. So there's these parallels in it. But at the same time, I thought making a painting of it, and rather than set it in some Italian town, I'm using like ruins of Rome, like the ruins of Rome when because after the Roman Empire fell, this big great city of Rome was still left where it kind of crumbled. And I'm using like old etchings, which were made in the 18th century, to make this old city, and then sort of fantasize about these plague ships leaving it. It's a kind of complex system. So I did a series of big watercolors, and now I'm working on this painting. Once that you get on this road about trying to figure this thing out, that really takes care of spending the days in your studio, and also all of a sudden working on the painting. Say, oh my God, this is really.
I think what's really interesting, Hank, because I've been thinking about this a lot during this period, is we're taught history from people who want us to know certain parts of history. So I've been spending time going back through history, and studied a lot of Japanese American history, Asian American history, but trying to understand more of this American landscape. I was doing some research and read about Memorial Day, that it was actually called Decoration Day. It was started originally, I'm not going to go into the whole story, but originally it was started by a group of freed slaves because they were reburying some Union soldiers who had just been hastily thrown into the ground at this posh racetrack in Charleston, South Carolina. And they had a parade around the track, and it was called the Martyrs of the Race Course. And I felt really cheated. Like if I had had that history growing up, how would I think differently about America? I mean, a lot of what I've done is research that history and my own history, but also other communities of color to know our history in America and the impact of racism in America, particularly on communities of color. But I have to always remind myself, we're taught history that somebody chose for us to learn a lot of times.
CHISAO, do you have a sense? I mean, I saw this, there was something on Facebook about this too. And I'm like, okay, I'm 57 years old,
Right.
lived in America my entire life, and I had never heard this story. And I'm like, how is that even possible? Like, I mean, I generally like to believe in the sort of the higher nature of human beings. Like I like to assume that that kind of wins out over the sort of selfishness and the sort of low. I mean, I realize that can be naive, but I generally think that there are enough people sort of pursuing the good that's something that's gonna. So I'm trying to figure out, how is it that we as African American people could be so marginalized that information would be kept out of the mainstream to the extent that like an African American wouldn't know it. I could totally understand if everybody didn't know it, but I'm like, why? How is it that nobody this never?
But we should all know it. We should all know that.
No, I'm saying I can understand why people study the history of that maybe is more personally to them, but this is a national holiday, and you would think that somebody would have at some point sort of, this would have been the founding story. It's the founding story. How do you hide the founding story for that long, and why?
I mean, it just happened that I was doing that research and found out about Professor David Blight's work, and he won the Pulitzer Prize in 2019 on the freedom on Frederick Douglass. And so, I understand. I've had to dig a lot and learn a lot of my own history because it was a paragraph in a history book. It wasn't like a paragraph. And so I'm just wondering, Hank, coming from another country to America, how did you see America, and how do you see America now with these stories that are?
I'm a very typical immigrant. I'm an immigrant, but I was educated in the Netherlands. I come over an artist family. My father was an artist. There's a lot of artists in our family, so I grew up in the arts. I was really well educated in Holland, and I met a young woman in Amsterdam who was from Portland, and we developed a relationship, and we got married in Amsterdam, and I moved through her to Portland. It was never really my idea I want to live in America. It was more fate which brought me here. However, when I was a little kid, I'm 82. So when I was a young child, like when I was 2, 3 years old, the Nazis came across the Dutch border and occupied the Netherlands. And as a child, in my early childhood, I lived through occupied Holland. I lived through famine. I remember bombing raids. I remember hunger. I remember people hiding. I remember terrible fear. And as a child, I had to tell the Nazis that my father was away, and while my father was hiding. And I mean, I was surrounded by this incredible, intense period. And by the time the war was over, when I was about 8 years old, that whole experience of mixing my childhood and being in a war and having some extremely nasty people walking around who would murder people right and left and ultimately just massacred millions of people in concentration camps and gas chambers and all of that. And being basically as a child a witness to that, it's sort of, you know, this sort of stuck in my head, as a reality. Although when I was young, I went to school, I just wanted to be an artist and make art and so forth. But when I came to the United States in the mid 60s, lo and behold, the United States was involved in a war, the Vietnamese War. And I was taught for a while, I taught at the art school year, and there were students which were taken away out of class and they had to, be inducted in the army. There were huge demonstrations. There was just an incredible, indescribable violence and technology and smart bombs falling on little villages and all that. It was just absolutely gruesome. And the artists here they were making color field paintings and stuff of like. But I grew up in a kind of art which tells stories and it has a kind of a political side. So pretty soon when I came here, I started making anti-war posters. I started, being involved in a kind of alternative things. I got involved in an alternative theater. We started doing, street theater. I started designing sets. And I started drawing like Goya about my imaginings of these battlefields in all the way in Vietnam. And so then in the 80s, I got a commission to do a big painting for a mural for Oregon State University. One of those murals had to do with World War One, and I went from here to France and then spent like 2 months at these battlefields in France and found this whole war still imprinted into the landscape, like forts and trenches and machine gun trees. And I found helmets and bullets and vast graveyards of like thousands of people were just all over the French landscape. German graveyards, French graveyards, American graveyards, vast cemeteries. And it rained, and it was just, the landscape was completely cratered. That was like in '84, and I thought, I wonder if war has imprinted itself in a warfaring country like America around here in Portland, and started looking at landscape which was affected by warfare. And I tried to find links between the Second World War and the residues of the Second World War in the American landscape as they link to my childhood during World War II also. So in a sense, I sort of started walking a road which has to do with Europe and me being here, being an immigrant. What is this country about? What am I supposed to paint here? I couldn't paint any more pictures like I did in Holland. I was now all of a sudden this big superpower and I had talent and I could make paintings. So I started making paintings about the experience out here in the United States as kind of an outsider immigrant. But as the longer I was here, I was also very much affected by it. So I'm kind of like this hybrid European American artist who's making this kind of history paintings, which are, in one hand, highly personal, on the other hand, have this sort of historical relevance. At least that's what I try to do. So that's kind of what I'm doing here as an immigrant artist, and try to make something out of it. There's so much things happening in life which have no grace whatsoever. They're awful. They're random. They're arbitrary. They're meaningless in a sense. And then what you can do as an artist and take what is meaningless and sort of look at it and give it some grace by making an artwork out of it. And that's pretty much what I try to do, other than selling like, watercolors to the interior decorator trade.
Darrell, I wanted to ask you, Darrell, like,
which is kind of dumb. So, but
good job. I wanted to ask Darrell, when you're talking about believing in the goodness of people, I mean, there's something about, you know, to be an artist, you have to create. And it seems sometimes that, you know, the trauma from racism or having our histories left out or being angry about that or being victimized about that has led some of the work. And then I'm at the point now where the last show that I created and this moving boundaries is a way to bring people together somehow. So like with Gambate, which is a Japanese American story and the story of more of a Portland, Japan town, I wanted to have a way. It's not like my story over here and your story over there, but can you see yourself through my story? Feel your story through my story? And so that's kind of the place where I want to try to connect, you know, connect people. And I feel like in America, I've always had this feeling like all the stories make America, not just one. So it's like putting a puzzle together, right? If you have all the pieces, it's going to work out. But if you have one piece missing, you're going to be searching for that piece. Instead, we have had somebody say, this is the puzzle and this is all put together. And so this is how it is. But I wonder about that, you know, for particularly white people that are maybe feeling threatened. You know, the people of color are going to grow in numbers and all of that. And I just want to say, this is an opportunity for a rich exchange and coming together. But the way it's going right now, it's frightening.
Well, I think, you know, people have the choice in how to respond to this. I mean, there's a lot in what you said, and I think one of the things for me, I'm realizing I was the dancer Linda K. Johnson was in one of my classes recently, giving a guest lecture, and she said that she doesn't want to make art that is about critique, and the way that she put that was like, oh, that's the word I've been looking for. She was more interested in making art that reveals possibility. So, and I feel like that too. I feel like on the one hand, I want to present information that is hidden. So I could totally make a piece about this this actual Memorial Day. I mean, like that information to me is really rich. I love the idea of telling stories that haven't had a chance to be told, and also, you know, sort of centering the narratives of the people for whom they are true, not the observer narrative, not the narrative of the dominant culture, but sort of bringing out. And I think that's what you do so well in your work. So there's that, and then but then I love this idea of not leaving it there, but really, it's kind of what Henk said. I had to write that down, what you said about taking what is meaningless and give it grace. Like that's the artist. And so that's you know, to imagine, because I'm always hoping that I can make change. You know, my heroes and my artistic heroes, besides the ones that are, you know, like great jazz pianists and, you know, Quincy Jones, my artistic heroes are those, you know, like, you know, Pablo Neruda or you know, even I'm thinking of our last poet laureate, but artists who are not afraid to take on leadership, who are not, I mean, they can put down their artistic tools and maintain their artistry as a way of leading and a way of sort of influencing the larger world. But the thing is that you can't always use your art to make change. But what I think I'm coming to learn and is that you can use your art to give people experiences that open the possibility for change. And so that to me is what's really compelling about, you know, what I'm trying to do. And to me, the change I want to imagine is a hopeful change. I can't imagine what it was like to grow up in, you know, in World War II, in occupation. I feel like I try and imagine like what we're feeling now is somewhat similar to that. You can't go out of your house. you might want to go out of your house, you can't go out of your house. You might want to go to the store, you can't go to the store. You might want food, you can't have food. The composer Artful in this interview recently, he said it's like the whole world is on a mega fast. It's like we don't have the opportunity to experience these things. But like fasting, it brings out the toxins. So the poison that was sitting underneath is definitely rising to the surface. But it also creates this incredible focus and this opportunity for sort of deep learning and reflection and growth. And so I think all of those things are happening now. And it's kind of exciting. I mean, I recognize that it's very difficult for people, but I feel like, CHISAO, you asked about the people who are afraid. It's like, yes, I mean, to give up one's privilege, to have one's privileges removed, whether, or to give them up, is frightening. And I think that, yeah, the world looks different when you see it from a privileged place and you recognize that you can no longer see it from that place. And that is what's necessary. But the possibility in that, the possibility of connection, the possibility that if you recognize that our lives depend on each other, then there's a possibility for something greater than this sort of protective, sort of holding on as hard as you can to the privilege that you are so afraid to lose.
I've, in some of my talks and in the community gatherings, I want to say, and I do say, that we have everything to gain. We have nothing to lose. Mm-hmm. We have nothing to lose by coming together. So if the privileged feel like we're going to lose something because it's being taken away, just flip that around and say there's nothing to lose. You have everything to gain. Because my experience with artists of color and people of color is y'all are missing out on a whole lot of stuff.
Right. That's necessary.
If we don't.
So I see we have a couple of questions. I didn't know whether you
want to great.
Where those are. Where are the questions? But I know there are two. Oh, they're going to put it on. Andrew said he's going to put it on the screen. Oh, there's a question.
Okay, please comment on the observation that the pandemic and the response to the pandemic have revealed more clearly the disparities between races and social classes in America. I was thinking about this, that my parents spent 3 years in concentration camp in America. 3 years. And so we've spent 2 months. So in terms of time, I'm hoping that, there'll be some relatability to that piece of time. But to address directly those disparities have been in existence. I see it when I'm in DC and and in the South, the food deserts that I've experienced. Even in Tacoma, I've experienced a food desert. So, that disparity is just showing itself now, because if you don't have a good, healthy diet, you don't have access to fresh food, then there's going to be more health risks. And then those health risks perpetuate a health system that depends on being financed, because it's a independent, like our prisons are now. They're private businesses. So there's something, I hope that we can look at it like, what can we do differently? How can we change these inequities? Not how, we must. We must.
We must vote, and vote these characters out of their existence, because there's just an incredible amount of violence. There's even a guy who was saying, I can't wait killing Republicans. And Trump sort of, said, yeah, that's a great idea and stuff. So I think that there's a kind of militia kind of developing in this country, which is extremely dangerous. I can't help but thinking back when I was a little kid, and the Germans were very nice people, and they were cultured, and they, had great composers and artists and musicians and writers and great schools and all that. And practically overnight, the country turned and became the most gruesome, vicious army and created the most monstrous war mankind had ever seen. So my fear is that things could really change really fast, and we may have all the ideals in the world, but there's a lot of people with a lot of machine guns and violence and really bad intentions who are incredibly dumb. And I don't really have that. I'm more of a pessimist a little bit in terms of, but of course we have to make art, and I have to make paintings, and I don't know what the purpose of these paintings is. I do, but they give me some kind of meaning, in my own life, that I can look at myself in the mirror and I said, this is the talent I've been given, and this is what I did with it. But in terms of these paintings having any kind of function, that they would change anything, or that people would collect them and want to hang them on their walls, or change people's minds or whatever. Now most people think these paintings are kind of scary, and they're great, but we don't really want to hang them on our wall. So yeah, I don't really know whether what I do, at least as an artist, has any kind of real other purpose than that. It gives me the kind of opportunity to reflect upon things and sort of sort things out for myself. That if something is affecting me really emotionally, I find disturbing, or I find something I can't get rid of, then I make something out of it and resolve it by making an artwork out of it. I mean, it sounds sort of like psychotherapy, but it does kind of making kind of meaning out of what oftentimes is meaningless. And I'm pessimistic in terms of my own field, whether it would have any kind of effect in terms of changing people. All that. The only thing it could probably do is that you in a sense could recognize yourself in one of my works. From I see that, I feel that way too. So that give you kind of maybe some sort of level of like recognition as a fellow person. But in terms of what's going on at the moment in this country, I'm very, very pessimistic about it.
Well, I feel a little bit hopeful because the young people are out there on the streets in LA, and people are having a rally tomorrow at Terry Shrunk Plaza, to recognize the murder of George Floyd. I mean, people are taking more of a stand. The mayor of Minneapolis, it's going to take people saying out loud to their family members, to their community, in our art, in all kinds of ways, that we don't choose this way of human beings to be.
Yeah,
We choose this way.
Yeah. It's not all bad. I tend to be kind of a pessimist, but
I think
the dark side.
Oh, that's okay. You can so be that.
Hey, Giselle, since I know we're running a little towards the end, there was one more question, and I was curious if we wanted to have that.
Well, I wanted to hear you comment a little bit on that before we take the next question.
Well, I mean, it's statistics, right? I mean, people with underlying conditions are more susceptible to the virus, and those underlying conditions include poverty, poor diet, lack of ability to, make healthy choices like staying home when you're sick, lack of opportunities to, sort of rest and, have someone else take care of your children, lack of opportunities to call somebody up and have them deliver groceries to you. I mean, it's not surprising that these, but what's really frightening about it is, as long as, when the underlying conditions were thought to be health conditions, this had more of a sense of an emergency. And maybe it's just coincidence that this sort of revelation that this disease is disproportionately affecting the poor and people of color. Maybe it's just coincidence that coincided with the shift to reopening the economy. It's like, well, it's more important to reopen the economy, and we lose some people, but we can't afford to. And I think that's sort of typical of the history of how this country tends to view marginalized communities. It's like, well, they're marginalized for a reason. So I think it just makes it a little harder for us to keep sounding the alarm about the seriousness of the illness and about the seriousness of the sacrifices we have to make. But
And definitely, I think as artists, we have a role in all of that, and I see younger artists stepping it up.
I
Really,
agree.
you know, yeah.
I'm not a younger artist, I'm sorry.
Oh, do we want to mention your shirt, Darrell?
Well, I mean, it's, I have this. I actually got this. Damien Jeter, my collaborator, my opera Sanctuary, has had this shirt, and I was like, I love that shirt. I really want that shirt. And it's so it's like, I'm rooting for everybody Black. It's a quote from a woman who was an actress who was nominated for an acting award, and so yeah, I mean, I think that, I'm committed to, kind of like Hank says, it's like, well, let me figure out what it is that is important about my work, what it means something to me. But I mean, and communicate that as best I can, and then be willing to sort of take off my artist hat and participate, as a community member. And I mean, I'm not going to lie. It's like, all these events, all these atrocities against, Black African Americans and people of color. It's really, it's frightening. It's demoralizing. I'm a father of a Black young man. It's just like, it's really disturbing. But I can't change my belief in what's possible. And because unlike Hank, I didn't grow up. I'm not a child of the Holocaust, so I can't. There's no way that, I mean, I might be at 82. I might turn out to be a bit of a pessimist, more so than I am now. But that doesn't feel really, to me. It still feels like, well, my role is to see possibility, to try and, like you said, CHISAO, to bring people together whenever I can, and to speak to what is best in people. I feel like they're going to do, I mean, Martin Luther King, this quote that I really love, he's like, the world isn't going to change until people willingly take on people willingly would rather suffer themselves than see other people suffer. And so if my job is to motivate people to make that choice, then I have to arm myself with all the tools at my disposal, but use the best ones, because to me, that's what it's going to take. It's going to take, sort of persuading, inspiring, moving, touching, inspiring people to take on suffering themselves rather than see other people suffer. So that's what I'm going to keep doing, to whatever extent I can.
I think that, thank you so much, Darrell. And through your music, we definitely are inspired. And if you were a true pessimist, Hank, you wouldn't be painting.
That's true too.
And history, my friend said history is prelude, so I believe that. Is there one more question there? Hey y'all, the three of you practice very different forms of art. Can you talk about the role of arts and culture at this time, when there are so many of us struggling to find hope during this pandemic? And how do your different art forms respond differently to these times, or are there differences? Thank you for
Well, I actually, I would love to talk about what I've seen. I mean, I don't know about the art form of music, but what I know is that in the community of music all around the world, people have recognized the power of music to bring hope, and they have, like, sort of just shared it generously and broadly and spontaneously in large groups and small groups. I mean, I think, it's been really amazing to me to see how people just immediately focused on what was most important, on when it was sort of bringing people hope in the midst of the trauma at the beginning of this crisis. They did that, making these videos and, concerts
Italy.
and singing on the balconies and just, playing concerts in front of their yards. And now I'm seeing my field sort of really go like, okay, how do we raise a whole pile of money? I mean, it's crazy to me, the number of like really, really famous musicians whose revenue dropped to absolute zero immediately all around the world. I mean, people that, it doesn't matter what your fees are if no one can pay, if you can't play.
Or if you can't go to a theater and that's what you do.
You can't go to make music. And so, rather than sort of secluding themselves, people have reached out and collaborated and started new platforms and new streaming services. And I mean, just so to me, this is really hopeful. This coming together. So that's what's happened in music. I don't know about dance or visual art or.
Well, I think I have this unique community activism and art that is trying to fit itself together. And so I've been spending more time thinking about the global connections that I've made throughout the last few years through my travels to Cuba and Hiroshima and different work that I've done, but also how can we do that more locally? And so when we do open up, what are the connections and how are we connecting?
Mm-hmm.
And are we making those avenues available to share art, to share our stories, to be lifted into the American history of everybody included? And I have an opportunity with the new Japanese American Museum of Oregon to develop some programming that is going to do that through the arts. So I'm very encouraged about that, not just theater, but spoken word. And all of our forms bring people together. So that's a common thing that we do through music and through theater, through art. I mean, they're all personal and together. So you may not know, Hank, if somebody looking at your paintings is so inspired that they're going to go do something or be motivated to stand up and take some action that they wouldn't have done before.
I know. We live also in a very beautiful world too. What is really kind of wonderful about this disease all of a sudden, like the skies are just gorgeous. There's wildlife in the streets. There's just an enormous amount of fresh air, and I get pictures out of like Amsterdam, for instance, and the city Amsterdam. All the Amsterdammers are delighted because all the tourists are gone, and it's just a city which is gorgeous without all the tourists stomping all over and all that. So there's kind of beauty to it. So I think that's great. And we live in a very beautiful world, but I think we're living also in a very terrible time because a combination of like having basically a fascistoid government and in combination with this horrendous disease sweeping across the world and all the borders closing down in all these countries, all of a sudden we're on our own now, and it's just a very disturbing sort of world we live in all of a sudden. And at the same time, of course, we have to sort of be able to see the other end of it, and hopefully we'll able to make it all through alive. Yeah. So,
well, hopefully we won't go back to the world. Hopefully we won't go back to the world the way exactly it was, but we can move forward into a world that we want to make. And I just want to underscore, thank you to both of you for taking your time and energy. I know we could go on for a long time, but we've got dinner and things to do. And thank you everybody for listening. And we hope we can have another art talk in between making art.
Yeah.
Yeah.
True.
So thank you.
Thank
Any
you.
last words, Darrell or Hank? Any last words?
Keep on keeping on.
Well, it was really a pleasure. it was also very nice meeting with you, Darrell, and
You
it's
too, Nick.
just been, I think one of the things that's been happening is that these new technologies and these kind of methods to be able to bring us together, which
Yeah,
I think is a really kind of wonderful thing. And I think that technology itself, thankfully, is going to help us out a great deal. And it's already bringing us together in
yeah.
these kind of conversations.
And you did it,
And
Hank.
I
You did
hope you'll
it.
continue
You're
with it.
on. Thank you, Vanport Mosaic. And thank you, Laura
Yeah.
Laforti, for this
Thank you.
opportunity to talk with each other.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.
Bye, people.
Bye.
Bye.